The words of John 8:32, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free," challenge what we've always believed. What if Yahweh, the omnipotent creator, is actually a tyrant or a fraud? Join Premonition as we explore these hidden truths and uncover the long-suppressed secrets. Contradictions in the Old Testament. The Old Testament contains numerous passages that seem to portray a stark contradiction in the nature of God, particularly when contrasted with the portrayal of a loving and just deity. Throughout the text, God commands actions that can be interpreted as violent, harsh, and even cruel. This contrast raises significant theological and philosophical questions about the nature of divine justice and love. For example, in Exodus 32:27-28, after the Israelites create and worship the golden calf, God commands Moses to instruct the Levites to kill 3,000 people, brothers, friends, and family, without hesitation or mercy. This tragic event stands as a reminder of the harsh consequences for disobedience. Yet it also challenges the notion of a loving God who acts with compassion. In another instance, Numbers 31:17-18 depicts God ordering the massacre of the Midianites, commanding the Israelites to kill all men and non-virgin women, while sparing only young virgins. The brutal nature of these commands, particularly the taking of young virgins as spoils of war, reflects a mentality that we today associate with tyranny, not justice. How are such actions consistent with the image of a loving and merciful God? These passages are troubling, not just to modern readers, but also to theologians who struggle to reconcile the image of a vengeful God with that of a deity who promises peace and love. Bloodshed in the name of justice. The theme of violence in the name of divine justice continues in several other parts of the Old Testament. 1 Samuel chapter 15 is particularly disturbing, where God commands the complete annihilation of the Amalekites. The directive is unambiguous. Not only should the men be killed, but also the women, children, infants, and even the animals. This edict raises serious ethical questions about the concept of divine justice. How can a being that represents perfect love and justice demand such widespread destruction, including the death of innocent children? The horror of innocent lives being sacrificed for what was deemed divine justice is hard to reconcile with the image of a compassionate and merciful God. Such passages are often juxtaposed with the teachings of Jesus, who preached forgiveness, compassion, and love for one's enemies. The stark contrast between the Old Testament God and the teachings of Jesus has led to theological debates and discussions for centuries. Many question how the vengeful actions in the Old Testament can be aligned with the New Testament's message of mercy and reconciliation. The Gnostic challenge. The stark contradictions between the image of a bloodthirsty God in the Old Testament and the loving, merciful God of the New Testament didn't go unnoticed by early Christian thinkers. One of the most notable challenges came from the Gnostics in the 2nd century. The Gnostics were a diverse group who held differing views about the nature of God, the world, and salvation, but they were united by their belief that the material world was flawed and corrupt. They viewed the God of the Old Testament not as the supreme divine being, but as the Demiurge, a lesser, imperfect deity who created the material world and trapped human souls within it. For the Gnostics, the true God was a transcendent, pure being who existed beyond the material world. This God was seen as a God of love, light, and spiritual freedom, in stark contrast to the harsh and vengeful figure of Yahweh. In their worldview, Yahweh was not the source of salvation, but rather a jailer who sought to imprison souls within the confines of the physical world. The Gnostic texts, such as the Gospel of Judas, portray Yahweh as a manipulative figure, intent on keeping humanity under his control and preventing spiritual enlightenment. This challenge to the traditional understanding of Yahweh was radical, as it undermined the foundational teachings of mainstream Christianity and Judaism. The Gnostics believed that true spiritual knowledge, gnosis, could only be attained by breaking free from the physical world and returning to the divine source, which they identified as the true God, beyond the realm of the material. These views were so controversial that much of Gnostic literature was suppressed and declared heretical by the Orthodox Christian Church. Jesus versus Yahweh, a clash of gods. In John 8:44, Jesus delivers a scathing rebuke to the religious leaders, calling them children of the devil. This accusation is far from a mere insult. It underscores the deep theological rift between the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh, and the God of love embodied in the teachings of Jesus. The religious leaders, who were the gatekeepers of Yahweh's law, were seen by Jesus and perpetuating a system based on strict obedience, legalism, and severe punishment. Yahweh, as portrayed in the Old Testament, demanded unflinching loyalty and commanded drastic measures, ranging from mass killings to other forms of severe justice for those who disobeyed. On the other hand, Jesus came preaching a radically different message of freedom, forgiveness, and reconciliation. His teachings emphasized internal transformation over external legal compliance. While Yahweh's justice was rooted in vengeance, Jesus' justice was rooted in mercy and love. This contrast did not go unnoticed by early Christian sects, particularly the Gnostics, who also saw a stark divide between the wrathful, tyrannical figure of Yahweh and the loving, compassionate nature of Jesus. The Gnostics not only noticed these differences, but also fundamentally rejected the narrative that Yahweh was the ultimate God. For them, Yahweh was a deceiver, a lesser God who had imprisoned humanity in the material world, while the true God was a transcendent force of love and enlightenment, beyond the reach of this flawed, earthly deity. The forbidden name of Jesus. The Gospel of Judas and other Gnostic texts introduce a provocative reinterpretation of Jesus' mission. Contrary to the view that Jesus came to simply reaffirm the laws of Yahweh, the Gnostics portrayed Jesus as a liberator sent to overturn those laws. In their view, Yahweh's laws were oppressive and designed to keep humanity trapped in ignorance and suffering. The Gnostics saw the material world as a prison, created by the Demiurge, a false god, often identified with Yahweh, who sought to keep souls bound to the physical realm. In contrast, Jesus, in the Gnostic understanding, was sent to reveal the truth and offer salvation by transcending the material world. He came not to uphold the oppressive laws of Yahweh, but to offer a new path, one based on enlightenment, freedom, and spiritual ascension. The Gnostics emphasized that true salvation came from knowledge, gnosis, the understanding of the divine truth that could free humanity from the chains of the physical world. This radically different view of Jesus and his purpose is present in texts like the hypostasis of the archons, found in the Nag Hammadi library, which explicitly condemns Yahweh as a jealous, corrupt deity. These texts argue that the Demiurge's creation of the world was an act of entrapment, designed to keep humanity enslaved in a cycle of ignorance and suffering. Judgment and mercy, the contradictions of Yahweh. One of the most striking contrasts between Yahweh and Jesus is their approach to judgment and mercy. While Yahweh's justice, as depicted in the Old Testament, is often harsh, retributive, and violent, Jesus preached a message of radical love and mercy. The Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 2:5, is a prime example of this teaching. In this sermon, Jesus explicitly rejects the principle of an eye for an eye, the lex talionis, from the Mosaic Law. Instead, he calls his followers to turn the other cheek, to love their enemies, and to forgive those who wrong them. This teaching directly challenges the punitive justice of the Old Testament, which demands strict retribution for wrongdoing. For Jesus, mercy is central to the message of the kingdom of God. He invited his followers to see beyond the letter of the law, emphasizing that love and forgiveness must supersede the desire for vengeance. Yahweh's justice, characterized by violence and bloodshed, stands in direct opposition to Jesus' model of justice, which was restorative, aimed at healing relationships rather than punishing transgressors. This dramatic shift in the understanding of justice and mercy is one of the key reasons why Jesus' teachings have been seen as revolutionary, not just in the context of his time, but also in challenging the view of God as a figure who demands vengeance and destruction. Through these radical teachings, Jesus presented a new path for humanity, a path that sought to break the cycles of violence and hatred, and instead embraced forgiveness, peace, and unconditional love. This approach to divine justice would later become a cornerstone of Christian theology, influencing the development of moral and ethical systems that prioritized mercy over punishment and reconciliation over retribution. The Gnostic view of the Garden of Eden. In traditional Christianity, the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden is often viewed as the fall of mankind, where the first humans disobeyed God by eating the forbidden fruit and introduced sin into the world. However, Gnostic thought presents a radically different interpretation of this event. For the Gnostics, the Garden of Eden represents the first attempt by humanity to break free from the prison created by Yahweh, the Demiurge. The Gnostic interpretation holds that Adam and Eve, when they ate from the tree of knowledge, did not fall into sin, but instead gained enlightenment. Their eyes were opened, and they became aware of the divine truth that had been hidden from them by Yahweh, the false god. In this narrative, the serpent, traditionally depicted in Christianity as the embodiment of evil, is reinterpreted by the Gnostics as a liberator. The serpent symbolizes the force that brought knowledge to humanity, allowing Adam and Eve to see beyond the illusion created by Yahweh. The serpent's role in revealing the truth was crucial for the Gnostics, who saw this as an act of liberation from the ignorance that Yahweh had sought to impose. When Yahweh punished Adam and Eve, expelling them from Eden, the Gnostics saw this as a reflection of his tyrannical nature. His punishment was not one of justice, but an attempt to keep humanity in the dark, suppressing their potential for spiritual awakening. The Gnostic vision, the true God beyond Yahweh. For the Gnostics, Yahweh was not the ultimate deity, but a false, oppressive God who ruled over the material world. They believed that the true God existed beyond the material realm, a divine being of pure light and love. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus imparts a profound teaching saying, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you have will save you." This statement speaks to the Gnostic belief in the divine spark within each person, a part of the self that transcends the material world and is connected to the true, higher God. Unlike Yahweh, who sought to suppress this inner divine spark through fear and control, Jesus came to reveal that spark and awaken the divine essence within all humans. Yahweh's laws, rooted in fear and sacrifice, were seen as a means to keep humanity bound to the physical world and ignorant of their true spiritual nature. Jesus, by contrast, preached a message of self-knowledge and inner illumination. He invited people to recognize the divine light within themselves, leading them toward salvation by breaking free from the chains of the material world created by the Demiurge, Yahweh. The Gnostics believed that true spiritual liberation could only come from this inner awakening and the direct connection with the higher benevolent God beyond Yahweh's domain. The role of Judas, the ultimate betrayal or liberation. The Gospel of Judas offers an intriguing perspective on the figure of Judas Iscariot, traditionally seen as the ultimate traitor in Christian doctrine. In the Gnostic tradition, however, Judas is portrayed in an entirely different light. Rather than being a villain, motivated by greed or malice, Judas is depicted as the closest and most enlightened of Jesus' disciples, the one who truly understood Jesus' mission. According to this Gnostic interpretation, Judas's actions were not a betrayal in the traditional sense, but a necessary part of Jesus' divine plan for liberation. In this version of events, Judas's betrayal was actually a fulfillment of a cosmic purpose. Jesus had come to liberate humanity from the confines of the material world, and the crucifixion was an essential part of this process. Without Judas's actions, the crucifixion would not have occurred, and without the crucifixion, there would have been no resurrection or salvation. Judas, in this context, is not a traitor, but an instrument of divine purpose, one who played a crucial role in the unfolding of Jesus' redemptive mission. This radical reinterpretation challenges the traditional Christian view of Judas as the ultimate betrayer and highlights the Gnostic belief that actions which seem treacherous in the material world may have higher spiritual significance. The Gnostic rejection of Yahweh's tyranny. The Gnostics fundamentally rejected the view of Yahweh as the true God, seeing him instead as a tyrannical, controlling deity. They believed that Yahweh ruled over the physical world with an iron fist, demanding obedience through fear, punishment, and manipulation. For the Gnostics, the material world was not a divine creation, but a prison constructed by this false god to trap and control the human soul. Yahweh's demands for sacrifices, his jealousy, and his violent punishments were all signs of his oppressive nature, not of divine justice or love. The early church, in its effort to establish orthodoxy, sought to suppress these Gnostic views, labeling Gnosticism as heresy and destroying many of their writings. Despite this, Gnostic texts like the Dead Sea Scrolls and those found in the Nag Hammadi library have survived, continuing to offer alternative narratives that challenge the dominant religious dogma. These texts present a portrayal of Yahweh that is driven by violence, jealousy, and control, in stark contrast to the image of a loving and just God that many have come to associate with the divine. The Gnostic rejection of Yahweh's tyranny serves as a critique of the authoritarian nature of both the Old Testament God and the religious institutions that perpetuate his image. For the Gnostics, true spiritual freedom could only be achieved by rejecting Yahweh's oppressive rule and seeking a direct connection with the higher, true God. This belief in the liberation of the soul from the material world became a core tenet of Gnostic thought, emphasizing inner knowledge, gnosis, and spiritual transcendence as the path to salvation. The Gnostic perspective challenges traditional Christianity by presenting Yahweh as a deceptive demiurge who created the material world as a prison, while Jesus revealed the true God of love and light. As these truths emerge, we must decide whether to cling to the world Yahweh created or awaken to the true divine reality. Your support helps us continue exploring these ideas further.